Lana Del Rey has gained a massive cult-like following ever since she first burst onto the scene in 2011 with the viral success of her song Video Games and the popularity of her hyper-feminine, sad girl, retro Americana aesthetic on websites like Tumblr. Fans often praise her embrace of romanticism, her anti-celebrity, anti-fame behavior, and her use of vintage, slower, sadder sounds and themes when contemporary pop culture felt too commercial or even materialistic. At a time when mainstream artists like Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, or Katy Perry dominated with their colorful aesthetics and upbeat electronic sounds, Lana Del Rey was refreshing and uniquely authentic, unafraid to go completely against popular trends and embrace an image that would typically be seen as outdated, boring, or even depressing.
Yeah, yo. How now?
Any Lana Del Rey fan would also probably say that one of her most appealing and unique aspects is her down-to-earth, simple indie aesthetic, pointing to her grassroots rise to fame, how she started out performing in bars, only knowing a couple of guitar chords, how the indie storytelling of her life and relationships in her music is authentic, how she had to work hard for her fame, failing multiple times with many different personas until she finally made it, and especially how her romanticization of working class, southern, low income, even impoverished conditions is just a reflection of her own upbringing and life experiences. Or so we're told. With great fame and visibility comes controversy and criticism, and Lana Del Rey is no exception. As a Lana fan who has already made video after video breaking down her appeal from a positive, admiring perspective, today, in the name of objectivity, I want to do something different and touch on the other side of the story, focusing on the many allegations brought against her and attempt to briefly remove myself from the biases of fandom. We will begin by covering Lana's life and upbringing, the validity of her claims of early financial struggle, how her alleged mommy issues may have affected her traditional perception of femininity, explore the allegations of cosplaying poverty and inauthenticity versus romantic appreciation. We'll also talk about postmodernism and the question, does it even matter if Lana is cosplaying poverty when we all cosplay the rich, the poor, the rural, the 2000s, the 90s, and every aesthetic core in between in the age of fast fashion, mass consumption, late capitalism, and the complete collapse of authentic cultural influence on identity? We will then conclude with my own opinions on all these issues and how I make sense of them as a massive Lana fan myself. So without further ado, this is Lana Del Rey, a deep dive into authenticity and perspective. Lana Del Rey was born Elizabeth Woolridge Grant on June 21st, 1985 in New York, New York, before moving upstate and being raised in Lake Placid. She was born to parents Rob and Patricia Grant and has a brother and sister named Charlie and Chuck. Lana had a pretty quiet early life because of her town's seclusion and very small rural population. Contrary to the popular she has daddy issues claims, Lana had a pretty good relationship with her father, with some even thinking she was far closer to him than her mother. We can see how much she venerates her father in songs like Cola, saying, "I pledge allegiance to my dad for teaching me everything he knows," but more on that later. Around the age of 14, Lana was sent to Kent boarding school to help deal with her addiction to alcohol. Lana has said that as a child, she was occupied by introspection and existentialism, thinking a lot about mortality and the existence of God, saying, "When I was very young, I was sort of floored by the fact that my mother and father and everyone I knew was going to die one day, and myself too. I had a sort of philosophical crisis. I couldn't believe that we were mortal. For some reason, that knowledge sort of overshadowed my experience. I was unhappy for some time. I got into a lot of trouble. I used to drink a lot. That was a hard time in my life." These early philosophical thoughts help explain what she chose to study in college, choosing Fordham University in the Bronx, majoring in philosophy with a fascination with metaphysics, or the branch of philosophy that deals with the basic abstract nature of reality. While attending school, Lana lived with her aunt in Long Island, waitressing for extra money, and has said that this was when her uncle taught her a few basic chords on the guitar and basically was the beginning of her music career.
It's pretty exciting to have made it all the way to the finals. I hoped that I would And I think we all agree that we wish it could last even longer because we've had such a good time.
Lana began her career as a simple indie artist with many different personas, from May Jailer and Sparkle Jump Rope Queen to Lizzie Grant and Lana Del Rey with an A, before finally settling on Lana Del Rey with an E, which is the iteration that ended up becoming successful. I am thinking of making a more detailed video on the unreleased underground era of Lana, but for the sake of time right now, I'm just gonna really summarize this part.
I have a disco ball, lights flashing all of the time.
Lana started performing at small bars around New York City, eventually moving out on her own into a New Jersey trailer park, and really lived the indie struggle, having her first EP Kill Kill and album Lana Del Rey flop, with her first glimmers of success only coming in 2011 with the upload of her self-made music video, Video Games, on YouTube. The virality of Video Games eventually led to Interscope signing her, beginning the mainstream successful arc of her career, and basically the rest is history. Now that is the grossly summarized official Lana lore, but there is much more to this story. Now, the first ripple in the Lana lore that investigators typically point to regarding her claims of growing up struggling is Kent boarding school, being that people who can afford any boarding school, especially one as prestigious and expensive as Kent, is definitely not something someone who claims to be raised poor or struggling would be able to do. Now, Lana has been repeatedly accused of downplaying the extent of her family's wealth, telling people that she literally came from nothing and struggled just like everyone else in multiple comments on Instagram. Because the themes in Lana's early work tend to focus a lot on working class experiences and romanticizing the struggle, many point to her father's success with internet domains and the .com boom, questioning her authenticity. But it apparently, again, goes much deeper than that. Now, my source for this next part comes from a Reddit user who had a lot of time on their hands and did a huge deep dive on Lana's ancestry, which I'll link below. But we basically begin with Lana's grandfather, Robert England Grant Sr., born in 1924. There's not much on his early life, but in the 60s, he became vice president of Textron Multinational, a multinational corporate conglomerate with a diverse portfolio that included industries like aerospace, industrial production, and defense. In the 70s, Robert became CEO of Grand Capital Management Corporation and invested in American Bakeries, which was the third largest in America at the time. Switching over to Rob Grant Jr., Lana's dad, born in 1953, he is in his late teens at this time and is said to spend his early years exploring the Atlantic coast in a 25-foot sloop, which can help explain his current love for sailing. In his 20s, Rob gets a degree in advertisement and then opens Brenton, a boat building manufacturer that leases and manages fleets for local resorts. At 24, Rob received $40,000 for publicity, advertising King William Scotch on the sales of his personal boat flotilla during the 1977 America's Yacht Race Cup. Around the year 1985, Rob became a highly respected copywriter of Protector & Gamble, Northwest Orient, and STP, which is where he would also meet Lana's mother Patricia, by the way. Rob won multiple prestigious advertising awards, including the President Award for Outstanding Creative Achievement in 1982, and various other awards for television campaigns he had also done. Shortly after Lana's birth in 1985, Rob and Patricia then moved to Lake Placid in 1986, with Rob starting an Adirondack chair company, buying and flipping residential properties, while Robert Sr. acquired land and hiking trails around the village. At 35 years old, and with Lana being 5, Rob sells waterfront camps for $1 to $5 million, and then creates Rob Grant and Associates real estate firm. In the late 90s, Rob became aware of internet domains, buying up as many as 15,000 of them, which were under real estate titles, making a huge profit during the .com boom. And honestly, y'all, I don't even want to keep going. You guys can read the rest of the timeline on Reddit, but by now we should all understand the girl is not cosplaying old money. She is old New England, private school, yacht sailing, property owning, stock market returning money. This can help explain not only her father being able to help fund her first official album, Lana Del Rey, but also possibly her ability to be a child Abercrombie model and getting accepted into Kent boarding school due to connections like allegedly her uncle working in the admission department. This topic still divides the Lana Del Rey fandom to this day, with some saying who cares, anyone can make art, and if it resonates with people, that's all that matters, and others saying it's more about lying and authenticity. But I'll save that for the next part of this video, because right now I just want to focus on laying out the controversies and claims made against Lana in general. So now let's go to Lana's first real controversy as a new artist in 2012, and how due to her previous personas resurfacing, her highly polished, some would say manufactured image, and her disastrous performance on SNL, many people claimed that she was inauthentic and even an industry plant. Many mainstream critics saw Lana as just a beautiful shiny veneer, like she was all aesthetics and image, with no real authenticity or talent beneath it, almost like a postmodern simulation of an artist. Someone who gained popularity due to the cult mythology surrounding her or the internet aesthetic she represented instead of actual talent, vocal ability, or hard work. In other words, to some people, she was just all branding and image, no real substance. Many people also saw Lana's romanticization of abuse, poverty, drug use, and mental illness as distasteful, insensitive, and even harmful, with her fan base being mostly young, impressionable girls. One of the biggest criticisms of Lana during her early career was also from feminists, and how she was seen by many as an anti-feminist, pick-me trad wife in an era of hyper-politicization, fourth-wave feminism, and especially the progressive social movements that exploded in the late 2010s. So now that I briefly laid out some of the biggest criticisms against Lana, I want to attempt to break down the ethics and arguments for and against these claims, starting first with the most popular, that she's just cosplaying poverty.
One of the most famous
Famous
trailers, yeah, the first one you see.
Whenever I think of that one lost footage style interview where Lana is walking around the trailer park she lives in during the Lizzie Grant era, I always think of that time Kylie Jenner and Travis Scott bought their toddler-aged daughter Stormy an entire yellow school bus, and how everyone was saying they were cosplaying the middle class. And all I could think about was the question, why do rich people seem to always obsess over poverty? One of the first things that came to my mind was sociology and the human desire to fit in. Now, to understand what I mean by this, we need to quickly break down how the Industrial Revolution and rise of the middle class affected culture and art in society. So for most of human history and nearly all cultures, societies were hierarchical, with a single ruler or family at the top and all power and wealth centered around them. These societal elites, usually a part of a monarchy or aristocracy, gatekept and dictated culture and art, meaning the bottom majority of the population looked directly to them for cultural guidance and inspiration. It wasn't until the disruption of the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment concepts of individuality and democracy, and the birth of the middle class that regular, everyday people began to create their own culture and norms detached from what wealthy elites thought or considered real culture. Because the middle class was far larger than the elite upper class and their contributions to modern culture far greater, the cultural center of gravity shifted from the elite tippy top to the middle class center. This meant when looking at a capitalistic society, the ones who influenced consumption trends and were the largest portion of the population by default now largely dictated how that society's popular culture would evolve and develop. Because most modern democratic nations usually culturally uphold this pro-working class, rags to riches, there is dignity in hard work, fuck the wealthy narrative, some rich people began to shift how they perceive culture and identity as well. The days of the king and aristocrats gatekeeping culture and art are over. The roles have reversed, and due to humans' desire for social acceptance and respect, rich people will sometimes look toward what seems to be the overwhelming norm and attempt to fit in, even if it literally means denying their own privilege to appear relatable. It's basically like attempting to gain social capital. You can have all the material capital in the world, but at the end of the day, humans still crave social acceptance. So basically from this point of view, I'm taking a quote-unquote empathetic approach and viewing the rich as privileged outsiders who just want to fit in.
Help me, I'm rich.
The other way I can see Lana cosplaying the poor or appropriating poor culture, I don't know how to make that not sound weird or terrible, but the other way I think what she does can be seen in a positive way is sort of how an outsider's perspective on something can sometimes help the insiders appreciate it from a different, refreshing angle. So for me personally, I felt like Lana taught me how to be more mindful and romanticize my circumstances no matter what they are. There are so many studies on how mindfulness can help improve mental health and depression. And from this perspective, I kind of agree with the art is art, and if it resonates with you, that's all that matters mindset. Through my use of romanticization, I felt like I gained more agency over my own life and was able to see the beauty in everything, giving my life and the events in it far more significance. I also tie this point specifically to Lana's self-made music videos and how that really had a huge impact on my perception of individualism and what could be considered art.
I was originally just collecting vintage footage from different archives and setting moving pictures to classical music clips that meant a lot to me. Maybe there were places I had been where nice things had happened. I had a vision of making my life a work of art, and I was looking for people who also felt that way.
Not only did Lana making her own music videos show me that new technologies were allowing us to create art with far fewer resources, but it also changed what I perceived as art altogether. So her low budget, vintage, random stock footage style actually became more significant and poetic to me than the mainstream resource-rich pop star music videos. Her early underground work felt more cinematic and mysterious, telling a story that felt authentic, relatable, and something we could also do ourselves with our own lives if we wanted. For people who like Lana, her early work showed us the beauty and poetic nature of amateur self-made art, whereas before, amateur was an insult, used to label something as tacky and cheap. This amateur aesthetic during a time of technological decentralization was subversive and empowering, further democratizing art and giving us more agency in how to produce it. Now on the flip side, the rich cosplaying the poor can be seen as unethical from many different perspectives. For one, it's just flat out inauthentic, and in the case of Lana, can be seen as especially annoying, being that she has repeatedly denied her privilege and even doubled down multiple times, saying she literally grew up with nothing. There's also just the dystopian angle and how from a bigger picture, people are economically struggling across the world as the rich get richer, and how the wealthy get to cosplay the poor without any of the real burdens that those who actually live that life have to suffer. In other words, maybe it's easier for Lana to appreciate something like living in a trailer park because she knows she simply doesn't have to, with artistic choice being the reason she lived there and not forced economic vulnerability. The last reason cosplaying the poor could be seen as unethical is that it may distort and misrepresent the reality of it, leading those who do struggle to become complacent, convincing themselves that poverty is poetic as they attempt to be more like the idols they look up to. So instead of maybe working toward a better life or putting pressure on elected officials to do something about societal issues like poverty, some may tell themselves that there is artistic dignity in their situation, limiting their own potential and therefore suffering needlessly. The rich cosplaying the poor and not being open about their advantages can also feed into the capitalistic lie of pure meritocracy, causing those with limited resources and opportunities to put unrealistic pressures on themselves with their goals, and when they don't or can't reach them, harshly blame themselves, sinking into depression and diminishing their sense of worth, instead of understanding that nearly all successful people, all billionaires, celebrities, had financial, social, and even psychological advantages that allowed them to become successful. The other big criticism against Lana was her perceived anti-feminist, conservative, pick-me behavior and aesthetic.
Sure.
Again, beginning from the more defensive position, I think this can be seen from several different points of view. First off, keeping in mind that I am a man.
Why would a man be there? Why would a man be there?
I always thought feminism was not just about equality, but also about choice. Meaning, if a woman wants to work, be independent, and break every traditional gender role ever created, they should not only be allowed to, but not be punished or discriminated against. And if a woman wants to be as hyper feminine, submissive, traditional, or housewifey as possible, they should also be allowed to. From this point of view, I sometimes empathize with Lana's early criticisms of feminism and how some perceive modern feminism as too restrictive in its own right, not appreciative of all expressions of womanhood and femininity like they claim to be. I definitely think Lana felt some of the early criticisms against her had to do with this, and how she appreciated a more traditional feminine aesthetic, especially at a time when female empowerment was defined in a very specific way and tied to breaking gender norms, independence, and an emphasis on emotional strength instead of emotional vulnerability. Another thing I find interesting, but is probably a stretch, is Lana's almost caricature-like expression of femininity and how it may also have to do with her rocky relationship with her mother. So, like I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video, it seems Lana was definitely a daddy's girl and had a pretty weird relationship with her mother, going as far as calling her mom her father's wife in the song Wildflower Wildfire, saying, "My father never stepped in when his wife would rage at me, so I ended up awkward but sweet." Now, Lana hasn't directly spoken about her mother much and will obviously never really know how great or horrible their relationship actually was or is, but what I do find interesting is how if they do have a bad relationship or possibly lack one altogether, how that may have affected her perception of femininity and womanhood. Now, what I mean by this is that assuming she lacked any real relationship with her mother or any good relationship growing up, maybe she was then unable to develop a real-world, nuanced perception of femininity, leading her to construct her own idealized, hyper-feminine one based on the caricatures from pop culture. It's the same phenomenon you sometimes see with fatherless boys, where they cling to hyper-masculine alpha archetypes because they don't have any real-world models for nuanced masculine development, and so they overcorrect and attempt to cling to what they see as idealized to compensate. Obviously, I am not Lana Del Rey's therapist, and again, as far as we know, this could be an astronomical level reach, but still, I do find the idea interesting when attempting to explain her behavior and aesthetic.
So I'm in the middle of editing right now, and I literally just remembered I have a friend whose parents were older, like Lana's parents are much older than her, and she also really naturally likes older sounds and aesthetics like Elvis and Aretha Franklin, and I've always sort of been jealous of her because it's so natural and authentic. It's not an aesthetic choice. Like everything we do, we might enjoy something, but it's because we were influenced by someone else and we want to be like them, not because we grew up with a certain style or sound. And I think that that could have also influenced her love for older retro sounds and glamorous 1950s 60s female aesthetics as well, and not just the whole possible mommy issues thing.
Now, moving toward how Lana can be seen as anti-feminist, I think some people can make some pretty compelling arguments as well. Like I just touched on in defense of Lana and feminist choice earlier, many people would say, well, yes, feminism is about choice, but some choices actively benefit the oppressor by validating and perpetuating their harmful beliefs. Similar to how some people choose to vote for someone even when they actively work against their own interests. Yes, they technically exercise their free will, but now that choice has consequences that will ultimately hurt society and movements that are trying to better others' situations. So from this point of view, young girls looking up to Lana may continue the patriarchal cycle of centering men in their lives and attempt to fit strict traditional gender roles or perceptions of femininity, which can be harmful because humans are far more nuanced than the categories we like to force ourselves into.
I'm a fan of the pro-animation. I do the drugs to stop the food craving. If you wanna get high with me, I'm in the back doing crack, drinking Pepsi.
There's also the whole romanticizing mental illness, drug use, and crime, which honestly, I'm not even going to try to get too deep into because that's a very nuanced topic, and just say I think that maybe has to do more with her acting out in response to feeling disconnected from her mother, similar to how a lot of young kids who don't get enough attention at home will start causing trouble in school or using shock value as a way to get people to pay attention. It could also just be a result of her relatively stable, wealthy upbringing. And again, how wealthy people often take stability for granted, viewing suffering as edgy, unique, and artistic, and minimizing the real-world trauma and struggle associated with it. Oh yeah, and how could I forget? There was also Lana's marriage and the controversy surrounding her new husband.
I know you do. Yeah, so we could just, if I go go this way, that means go left. Go this way, go right.
On September 26, 2024, Lana Del Rey married Jeremy Dufrene, a Louisiana alligator tour guide, which is the most Lana-core thing I have ever heard, by the way. Many fans felt Lana was rushing into something she might regret, being that the marriage came out of nowhere, with others pointing out she had most likely been privately dating him for a couple of years, being that there were old videos of them together already. Now, to many people, the most disappointing part about Jeremy came when fans unearthed his old Facebook profile, allegedly showing him supporting Trump and making anti-trans posts. Many Lana fans had already been fighting tooth and nail for her ever since the fateful Question for the Culture dropped, and many felt this marriage was truly indefensible, especially with so many rumors circulating that she was already this type of secret Republican, anti-feminist, privileged white girl. What's more, Lana had previously been quite vocal against Trump, even claiming to have hexed him, with her albums Lust for Life and NFR being overtly political, and at times even anti-Trump. To many, this was the final nail in the coffin, proving that Lana's political activism was tone-deaf at best, performative at worst. Some even pointed to this as another example of shallow white feminism, or activism that is limited to the activist's own relation to oppression, meaning they only care when it directly affects them, but disregard the deeper systemic and intersectionality aspects of it, with their short-sightedness allowing them to excuse others' ignorance. In other words, Lana chose to be political when it was trendy and directly affected her, but quickly fell silent when it affected others, and even excused a Trump supporter enough to marry him, which seemed unbelievably disappointing and hypocritical. Now, the only plausible explanation for this political radio silence I've thought of has to do with her unfortunate, horribly timed, tone-deaf post, Question for the Culture, and how she was trying to make a point about feminism, but somehow found a way to tear down other black female artists and victimize herself during the height of BLM. To be fair, Question for the Culture probably deserves its own in-depth video, but to many, that post was laughably untimely and felt like just another white woman victimizing herself during a time of political unrest with black Americans being shot in the street. I cannot speak for Lana, but I do want to believe she had good intentions with that post, with her privilege making her unable to see how it was completely tone-deaf, and I think the mass online criticism she received probably scared her to death from ever being political or even just sharing a strong opinion ever again. But back to Jeremy, I think their marriage is weirdly somehow so on brand and also disappointing. But one thing it is not is surprising. Now, I think everyone deserves to have their own opinion on all this, and I am not trying to tell anyone how to think. But what I will say, from my own experience, is that this is nothing new. Those who are privileged have always excused others' suffering when it doesn't directly affect them. So does that mean I think Lana should just get a pass? Obviously not. Am I surprised she married a Trump supporter? Unfortunately, not at all. The last thing I want to go over is the claims made against Lana's persona and authenticity. Not so much the poverty or struggle aspect, but her appreciation for the past and her retro Americana inspired aesthetic. Even though this was honestly one of the things I loved most about Lana, a lot of people really disliked it, viewing it as inauthentic, boring, and even lazy. The 2010s were really the beginning of the era of mass nostalgia time period cosplay, and even though that's pretty common now, Lana was one of the first musicians who heavily leaned into retro cosplay. I wanted to focus on this aspect and analyze how it dovetails with postmodernism and even current trends of aesthetics and cores, and everyone obsessing over the past and nostalgia. Now, postmodernism is quite a complex topic, but it can be roughly defined by two main factors. One, a mass rejection of grand narratives, skepticism of everything due to the world wars, government corruption, and new technology. And two, post-war industrialization and new technologies allowing media and culture to be reproduced at incredible rates. I want to focus on the second media-based aspect and how that affects modern culture and trends today. So, due to media being reproduced at such fast rates, cultural inspiration increasingly began coming from the past, with those cultural throwbacks eventually themselves also being rehashed again in the future. So an example of this is how today's 2020s culture is obsessed with bringing back the 2000s aesthetics, with the early 2000s aesthetics also being inspired by the 1970s. The 2010s were a mishmash of the 90s and 80s, and I'd bet the late 2020s and early 2030s will be a rehash of the 2010s, as Gen Alpha becomes adults and expresses their own nostalgia. In other words, it's basically just a constant rehashing and recycling of culture and trends, with the authentic lived lived experience they used to represent becoming irrelevant. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard touched on this concept in his book Simulacra and Simulation, basically explaining how in a postmodern world, symbols, history, culture, and inspiration become simulations or representations of the real thing, with the real thing eventually becoming disconnected from what we associate it with in the present altogether. An example commonly used for this is how the dominance of modern media and the symbols they create erode their objective inspirations. So, when people think of real historical princesses, they may first imagine something that resembles a Disney princess versus the actual historical thing, because we are drowning in media simulations of the world, which erodes and smothers their objective origins. Or again, what is considered 2000s aesthetics today is increasingly being associated with the modern Gen Z stylized version, not the authentic, actual, real 2000s aesthetics. So in short, it's just the concept that media is being reproduced so quickly that it's rehashing everything and replacing the authenticity of the actual thing it represents. This brings us to the modern day with aesthetic core culture, cosplay-like fashion, and Lana Del Rey. This is where I like to point out that Lana cosplaying the past or even an entire identity like the working class isn't necessarily limited to her or the rich, but is a part of a larger cultural trend that I would argue most people today are taking part in. We can see Brooklyn gays who have never stepped foot on a farm, dressing as if they are blue-collar, small-town, rural retired hunters, poverty-stricken individuals spending their last check on expensive brands so as to look, quote, old money, and everyone and their mother cosplaying some sort of community, core, or time period. The point is that we live in a world where the way we express our identities no longer has much to do at all with if those identities are based on our own lived experiences and have more to do with pure aesthetics in the media we consume. I can go on and on about this topic, but I'm going to save that for another video on postmodernism and how capitalism and mass consumption have collapsed authenticity in culture. So subscribe if you're interested in that topic, because that video will be coming very soon. So as someone who has made so many damn videos about why I love Lana and even compared her ass to Jesus Christ himself, I know many of you are wondering, what do I think about all this, and how do I reconcile my faith in Lana with the knowledge that I and you all now have? And I guess I would just say that I don't reconcile it. I see her for who she is because I'm not the type of person who replaces my lack of religion with an obsession and worship of another human being. I think for many people, they find it hard to criticize their idol because they aren't really seeing them as the flawed, nuanced people they actually are. All I care about is art, and if that art accurately resonates with me and reflects my own personal experiences. And Lana just happens to do that for me. But I will never invalidate those who find issues with her aesthetic or what she does, and I will always take the time to see others' point of view because I care about objectivity, and again, I'm not just a blind follower. I've made plenty of videos on celebrity worship and how weird it is, and I just think it's important for us to hold all our idols accountable and be honest with ourselves. Nobody is perfect, people lie, and there's nothing wrong with pointing that out. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think she's unethical? Do you hate her? Do you love her? Do you just not give a fuck because it's art? Let me know in the comments. And if you did like it, subscribe because I have a lot more ideas for similar videos coming soon.